3:17 a.m. Gulf time. The first distress call breaks across marine radio like torn metal. A tanker captain is shouting bearings, fire, loss of steering, men burned on deck. Then the signal cuts into static. On radar, the ships behind him begin turning in hard, ugly arcs. Navigation lights scatter across black water like sparks from a grinder. Far inland, traders in New York are still asleep, but the machines under their desks are already awake. By sunrise, the world understands one thing: a narrow strip of sea is now holding the global economy by the throat. The strait does not look like the center of civilization's weakness. It looks too small, too ordinary, too exposed. Brown mountains, heat haze, patrol wakes slicing through flat water. Yet every convoy commander in the region knows the geometry by heart. At its tightest point, the corridor feels less like an ocean and more like a firing lane. Ships enter in single-purpose lines, predictable and slow. Missiles do not need imagination there. Drones do not need courage. They only need coordinates, timing, and a government willing to make the first ship burn before dawn. Insurance desks in London begin marking policies red. Risk models flip. War clauses trigger. How premiums leap by the minute. Satellite phones ring from Muscat to Singapore. Captains ask if they should wait, run, or reverse. Nobody gives a clean answer because nobody knows if the first hit is an accident, a warning, or the opening round. That uncertainty is the real weapon. It does not sink one ship. It freezes 100 others. And once ships stop moving, fuel stops being a commodity. It becomes leverage. In command rooms, officers speak in clipped code and stare at live feeds. They watch swarm signatures rise from coastlines and vanish into sea clutter. They watch transponders blink out, then reappear miles off course. DEFCON language enters conversations that were routine yesterday. Rules of engagement tighten, then stretch. One admiral wants escort corridors, another wants preemption. Civilian ministries still talk about duscolation, shipping, confidence, market stabilization. The military does not use those words anymore. It uses survivability, target packages, mine countermeasures, missile windows. It knows the map has already changed. The public sees none of that at first. Civilians wake to headlines that feel familiar, almost recycled. Tensions in the Gulf, shipping disruptions, oil rises on regional instability. The language is bloodless because institutions fear panic more than shortages. Morning anchors keep their voices level. Government spokesmen urge calm. They say supply chains are resilient. They say strategic reserves exist for a reason. They say there is no cause for alarm. Then gas futures gap upward before breakfast, and the lie begins cracking in real time. In trading floors, the catastrophe is not a shock. It is a scenario file. It has been modeled, backtested, color-coded, and filed under low probability high-yield events. The names differ by bank, but the logic never changes. Maritime choke point compromised. Regional escalation likely. Energy complex reprices. Freight indexes spike. Defense flows follow. Inflation expectations reset. The same firms that publish calming research notes keep private books on exactly how chaos spreads through transport, fertilizer, plastics, aviation, sovereign debt, and food. They do not need certainty. They only need velocity. At 6:02 a.m. in Manhattan, the first macro desk begins unwinding shorts and loading into volatility. Orders slice through dark pools before commuters clear tunnel traffic. Commodity funds, buy crude, then by shipping, then by refiners, options. Traders pay absurd premiums because absurd becomes rational when supply risk turns physical. A junior analyst watches a model light green across 6 sectors at once. He does not cheer. Nobody does. The room grows quieter as money starts moving. That silence is the sound of preparation meeting opportunity. By mid-morning, the trigger is clear enough to terrify professionals. 2 tankers are disabled. 1 patrol boat is gone. Several commercial vessels report GPS interference and hostile warnings on open channels. A mine is suspected, then confirmed. Not old drifting junk, but a placed obstacle in a managed route. That matters. It means intent. It means planning. It means someone is not merely posturing for negotiation. Someone is running a protocol. And once protocols start, they do not stop because television panels ask them politely. The first systems to fail are not dramatic. They are ordinary, invisible, and therefore cruel. Fuel distributors stop quoting reliable delivery times. Ports refuse liabilities they accepted yesterday. Banks widen collateral demands for commodity houses already stretched thin. Freight contractors rewrite themselves in the language of force majeure. At airports, jet fuel hedges suddenly matter more than passenger demand. At fertilizer plants, procurement managers stare at screens and realize the next shipment may never arrive. The modern world does not collapse with explosions alone. It collapses through spreadsheets that stop making sense. Then the consumer layer feels it. Gas stations do not run dry immediately. They run weird first. One station has fuel but no premium. Another has fuel but cash only. A third has pumps working and no delivery schedule. People notice prices jumping while they stand there. They refresh apps and watch numbers climb between glances. Denial lasts a few hours. Then the first videos appear. Drivers topping off every vehicle they own. Plastic cans in truck beds. Arguments over life. Panic never announces itself. It imitates prudence until the shelves are empty. Inside supermarkets, the pattern is older than any algorithm. Families do not buy what they need. They buy what other frightened families might soon need first. Water, rice, batteries, baby formula, shelf-stable milk, cooking oil. The empty space is spread by imitation, not hunger. Workers drag pallets onto floors and know they're already late. Managers print apology signs before lunch. By evening, the frozen aisle is still full, but nobody trusts electricity anymore. That is the shift. People stop shopping for the week. They start shopping for their breakdown. On highways near major ports, diesel queues lengthened like scars. Truckers idle under a hot sky, listening to contradictory reports. One says the Navy will clear the channel in hours. Another says more mines are in the water. Another says insurers have pulled cover entirely. Drivers check dispatch messages that never arrive. Refrigerated trailers hum, burning fuel to preserve food that may not reach stores. Every hour of delay costs someone money. Every rumor costs someone sleep. The economy is not a machine here. It is a chain of human nerves stretched too tight. In ministries and central banks, the language becomes sterile again because sterile language keeps leaders functional. Energy security councils convene. Reserve release mechanisms are reviewed. Naval coordination cells map escort lanes and missile arcs. Economists recalculate inflation paths with faces that reveal nothing. Yet behind those closed doors sits the same recognition everywhere. There is no true substitute for a live corridor carrying this volume. Pipelines can soften the wound. They cannot replace an artery. And this artery is now under a gun held by men who understand timing better than diplomats do. The market's next move is uglier because it is selective. Energy producers rally. Not all of them, only the ones with secure routes, inland storage, and political insulation. Defense names climb with a grim steadiness that feels almost polite. Tanker firms with safer routes become temporary royalty. Airlines sag. Retail weakens. Chemical makers slide. Emerging market debt starts to breathe harder. Pension funds eat the drawdown without a headline. Households feel the price shock before they understand the ticker. That is how the transfer works. Loss arrives retail. Gain arrives institutional. What makes the moment terrifying is not the visible blast. It is the invisible lag behind it. Every barrel delayed at the Strait becomes a future pressure wave elsewhere. It reaches power bills, plastics, shipping surcharges, food inputs, and municipal budgets. Natural gas reroutes raise industrial costs half a continent away. Fertilizer tightens, harvest forecasts dim before seeds even touch soil. Packaging costs rise. Refrigeration rises. Irrigation rises. Nobody on television says famine. They say inflation persistence, but in poorer places. The difference between those words is merely who gets to starve politely. By nightfall, information itself becomes contaminated. Social media fills with maps, fake convoy schedules, invented ceasefires, and footage from older wars recaptioned as live. One account says the channel is reopening. Another says a supertanker is blocking it entirely. A third claims retaliatory strikes are underway. Millions see each version before any verification arrives. Traders exploit the fog. Politicians hide inside it. Civilians drown in it. The stage clarity is no longer empowering. It is rationed, delayed, and sold. Information now behaves like water in a siege city. In capitals across Europe and Asia, emergency meetings run past midnight. NATO planners discussed maritime security without pretending this is only about shipping. Asian importers reopened dormant crisis playbooks. Strategic reserves are measured not in barrels, but in days of political patience. Every finance minister knows the same equation. If energy stays high long enough, governments either subsidize pain or absorb revolt. Both are expensive. Both weaken them. This is why choke points matter more than speeches. A state does not need to conquer its enemy directly. It only needs to make governing unaffordable. Meanwhile, the men who prepared for this do not appear on camera. They sit behind layered compliance systems and speak in abbreviations. They have war game binders, freight exposure maps, refinery outage trees, and private briefings from former admirals now wearing tailored suits. They know which missile systems can deny transit without full closure. They know how many days until rationing language enters cabinet meetings. They know which sovereign funds will rotate into treasuries if panic deepens. Crisis is not novel to them. It is a category. And categories can be monetized. A young shipping executive in Dubai watches the order book collapse on one screen and freight rates explode on another. He should feel dread. Instead, he feels something colder. Recognition. This is not disorder. It is a market discovering its truest price under coercion. Safe passage had always looked cheap because navies absorbed the invisible cost. Now the invoices arrive in all at once. It includes escorts, insurance, delay, rerouting, damaged hulls, and political leverage. The world had mistaken uninterrupted flow for natural law. Tonight it learns flow is a subsidy enforced by force. At sea, crews adapt faster than governments. They black out unnecessary lights. They alter watch rotations. They rehearse fire containment and abandon ship drills that nobody believed they would need. Merchant sailors become frontline labor without ever being called soldiers. Engine rooms run hotter under stressed routing. Galleys go quieter. Sleep becomes fragmented and tactical. A cook from Carella ties down loose metal in heavy seas, while missiles dominate every conversation above him. This is how globalization survives its own myths. Anonymous workers keep moving through danger, while executives speak about resilience. The physical environment begins joining the crisis. Smoke hangs low over the water after a strike. Burnt fuel drifts toward coastlines and coats harbor surfaces in iridescent poison. Navigation becomes harder in haze. Sensors degrade. Thermal clutter worsens, targeting and rescue alike. Even when no missile flies, the sea feels occupied. Every wake resembles approach. Every radar contact suggests intent. The human brain is not built for continuous ambiguity. After enough hours, crews stop reacting to danger with spikes of panic. They settle into a deeper condition. Permanent readiness. Permanent fatigue. Then comes the quiet beat that always marks civilizational stress. One district loses power for an hour because a fuel delivery misses its slot. Another city imposes temporary rationing on industrial users. Hospitals check generator reserves with unusual frequency. Elevator lights flicker in luxury towers while portfolio managers debate whether the worst is priced in. In that contrast sits the whole architecture of the age. One floor above, men discuss basis spreads. 10 floors below, janitors wonder if tomorrow's commute will cost too much to justify tomorrow's shift. The governments attempt the old remedies. They release reserves. They threaten escorts. They promise consequences. They call allies and activate hotlines. Some of it helps around the edges. None of it changes the central fact. A corridor that usually functions on expectation is now functioning on fear. Minds can be cleared, but only slowly. Missiles can be intercepted, but not all of them. Drones can be jammed until one slips through. Insurance can be subsidized, but not courage. The route is still open on maps. On human terms, it is nearly closed. In the markets, something uglier emerges. Orders appear seconds before public statements. Oil sells off before diplomatic optimism hits the wires. Defense names jump before security briefings leak. Freight derivatives whip in patterns that claim to be random. It feels less like foresight and more like access. The suspicion spreads quietly first, then everywhere at once. Somebody knows what governments will say before governments say it. Somebody is trading national security like weather. That revelation is more corrosive than the missiles. Weapons destroy ships. Insider advantage destroys legitimacy. The public does not need to understand option structures to sense the insult. They only need to see gasoline rising, groceries thinning, and indexes celebrating in the wrong places. They only need to hear that some fund made a fortune on a move timed to the minute. Modern life asks citizens for endless trust. Trust the institutions, trust the supply chain, trust the market signal, trust the strategic reserve. But trust is a perishable asset. Once people suspect the pain is not accidental but harvested, anger becomes harder to contain than shortages. This is where the social fracture begins. Those with generators, reserves, savings, and private intelligence streams start living 1 week ahead of everyone else. Those without any buffer begin living hour to hour. Neighborhoods diverge in posture. Some become cooperative, sharing updates and pooling fuel. Others harden behind gates, cameras, and private guards. Preparedness stops looking eccentric, it starts looking like class privilege with batteries. The split is not simply rich versus poor. It is informed versus exposed. And exposed people are always the first to be told to remain calm. Across the Gulf, desalination plants, food terminals, and coastal substations move to emergency protection. The invisible threat now outruns the visible one. A missile strike can be counted. A contamination event cannot. A navigation jam can be detected. A rumor about poisoned water can crash a city by noon. Civilians fear what they cannot measure more than what they can see. Radiation does this. Fallout does this. So does strategic uncertainty. When people no longer trust water, power, or official statements, society does not explode. It untergis. Leadership speeches begin sounding less confident because reality keeps editing them. One head of government promises stabilization, then faces a refinery outage. Another vows deterrence, then loses shipping confidence. Another announces solidarity while quietly bidding against allies for cargoes on the spot market. International unity survives the first press conference, then meets procurement. Each nation remembers its own voters, its own winter, its own trucking fleet, its own election cycle. That is the cruel brilliance of a maritime choke point. It converts a shared crisis into competitive desperation faster than treaties can respond. Wall Street, however, remains ideologically consistent. It does not ask whether the event is moral. It asks whether it is durable. It studies curve shape, inventory draws, convoy survivability, and reserve depletion. The moral dimension exists only as volatility input. If suffering persists, earnings estimates adjust. If war widens defense, multiples expand. If diplomacy fails, storage becomes a premium business. The same civilization that cannot stock enough baby formula for a panic week can deploy 10 layers of derivatives around a shipping shock before lunch. That is not hypocrisy. It is design. Weeks pass, and the new normal arrives, not as a headline but as habit. People drive less, deliveries cost more, airlines cancel thinner routes, factories pause on certain shifts, farmers revise fertilizer plans, governments test rationing language in smaller sectors. First, hoping nobody notices the rehearsal. Children hear adults use words like convoy, reserve draw, insurance premium, and missile window at the dinner table. What begins as a distant maritime crisis now occupies domestic time. That is how global choke points really work. They travel inland through routines until routines become fragile. Some ports recover partially under naval escort, but confidence does not. Every resumed transit carries the memory of flames. Every cleared lane suggests another uncleared lane nearby. Crews demand higher pay. Insurers demand more paperwork. Cargoes demand more political guarantees. Nothing returns to baseline because baseline itself was a psychological structure built on presumed passage. Once broken, it can be patched but not restored quickly. Markets eventually price risk. Households must leave it. The spreadsheet can normalize a permanent premium. Families cannot normalize permanent precarity. From the macro view, the geopolitical lesson is brutal. A great power does not need to lose a war to lose control. It only needs to reveal that a cheap drone, a mine, and a narrow strait can rewrite global prices. Article 5 rhetoric, carrier strike groups, sanctions, packages, reserve releases, all of it still matters. But the myth of effortless stability is gone. The world sees how thin the corridor is. It sees how dependent Asia remains. It sees how quickly Europe It sees how profit races ahead of fallacy. And so the aftermath carries no clean ending. The ships eventually move in larger numbers again. The headlines soften. Markets rotate. Analysts publish retrospectives about resilience and adaptation. Yet under that recovery sits a harder truth. Insurance stays higher. Security stays tighter. Strategic stockpiles grow larger. Energy nationalism deepens. Every state now budgets for the next closure. Every serious fund now models the next panic with better data. Crisis leaves scars on halls, but it also leaves upgrades inside institutions. The next time becomes easier for some and crueler for everyone else.